ATF Society Part 2 Session 2R. Last week, we started the term with the descriptions and definitions of some economic terms. These terms were land, labor, capital, wealth, rent, wages, and interest. Land, we said, was all the natural resources and includes not merely the minerals which lie in the earth, but the wild beasts and birds which lie upon it, all the natural resources exterior to man himself. We further defined land as all the natural resources which the man controls by reason of his ownership of part of the earth's surface, or by reason of the rights which he possesses over land occupied by others. Of labor, we defined as all human effort. It includes both physical and mental effort. Of wealth, we said that this was the great family of human products. Of capital, we said that this was wealth that was used to produce more wealth. We said that human desire was the driving force that brought land, labor, and capital together. We further defined rent as that share of value which a man is able to obtain through his control of land. Wages was defined as that share of wealth, of value, which a man is able to obtain through his control of his labor, and interest was defined as that share of value which a man is able to command through his control of wealth. During the course of the past week, did we see how all these on display in the community? What did we see? This week we shall begin to explore the question of whether poverty and social inequity are the inevitable result of operations of natural forces, and that the best we can do about it is to provide for the majority of citizens, and that a minority will always have to suffer. What do we think of this? There are two underlying theories that speak to this inevitability and has found general acceptance with the majority of citizens throughout the world. These theories are the wage fund theory and the Malthusian Doctrine. The wage fund theory is based on the view that wages are paid out of a pre-existing stock of wealth, and that, consequently, labor is dependent on this stock for employment and for all payments thereto. There's another thought that suggests an economy can only thrive and grow when investment of existing wealth is made in the economy. In other words, there must be a pre-existing stock of wealth from which drawings could be made for the economy to produce. There is the other thought which says that it is the ownership of capital by the few that is the problem, and that all the state has to do is to have total control of the production process for a more equitable distribution of wealth in the community. There is a third view of mix of the two above policies by the state, where the state should allow private investment, and when and where there is shortfall of investment, government should step in and augment the investment by maintaining funding at a sufficient level. This third approach assumes that government would have control over the commanding resources of the economy. In all three instances, it is assumed that wages are paid from an available stock of wealth existing either from private sources or the state or both. The wage fund theory goes by the following simple equation. Wages equals capital, a pre-existing stock of wealth, divided by a number of laborers. This equation suggests that when pre-existing stock is low and its number of laborers are high, and wages will be low. When wages are high, the number of laborers are low for the same level of wealth. This theory, when put to the test, does not bear out. When America was in colonial times, The pre-existing stock of wealth was much lower than in Europe or Great Britain at the time, yet wages were comparably much higher per capita, although the population was growing astronomically all the time. At the time, land was freely available, so that wages determined at the marginal site would have been high. There would come a time when lands would become fully claimed and wages would begin to fall. The other phenomenon that debunks the wage fund theory is that under the conditions of low wages, high unemployment, interest rates are consequently high because wealth is low. In conditions where wealth is high and the number of laborers is low, wages are high and interest rates are low. In periods of depression, as in the worldwide depression of the 1930s, this was a period of low wealth, low wages, high unemployment, and ironically low interest rates. Interest rates rose at the same time that the depression was lifted, when wages began to rise as well as wealth and employment. The wage fund theory also implies that for employers of capital to gain a greater reward for use of capital, wages would have to be low. This also does not bear out as seen by what happened in the Depression and thereafter of 1930 and thereafter. Wealth increased only when wages increased as depression was lifted. The wage fund theory does not explain how a person working for himself, his wages does not come from some existing stock. A fisherman or farmer is certainly paid from his fish catch or his agricultural produce. In many occupations, the worker is paid a portion of his produce as wages. It makes no difference if money is substituted for the portion of the produce. All wages in whatever category of labor expended are paid from the produce of that labor and from no other source. The produce of labor must produce more than the laborer's wage. It must produce enough wealth to pay rent, rates and taxes, interest, insurance premiums, depreciation, wear and tear, etc. If this does not happen, the business will eventually come to a halt. All this is in contradiction to the premise that there must be a pre-existing stock from which wages are paid. We will have a break now, and when we return, we will consider the premise of the wage fund theory that suggests the wages are advanced from a pre-existing stock of wealth for payments to laborers when the product takes a long time to be produced, such as a building project, etc. There is the prevailing theory that a large stock of wealth has to be built up for the funding of a project that takes a long time to materialize. This, they say, is necessary to clothe and feed the laborers, to produce the wealth, to produce the material and procure the equipment necessary for the project. When the product is produced and sold, the entrepreneur can recoup the expenditures incurred from the wealth put up originally. What are the facts? The facts are that men are fed and clothed during the course of the project by food that are harvested a few days before by farmers and butchers. Clothes are provided by tailors made a few months earlier. Milk delivered from dairies a few days before. Electricity is delivered by power stations produced and supplied instantaneously. In summary, labor is provided from wealth produced day to day by their fellow men in society. Labor is being constantly provided in the society, producing numerous goods and services, the absence of which the society could not thrive. What actually happens in a long-term project is this. The contractor brings to the site all the materials and equipment, etc. This we call his capital, his wealth to produce more wealth. He may have credit from a bank in the form of an overdraft facility. All the while the project is proceeding, labor is being advanced and wealth is being produced. So far, the employer has advanced nothing, according to the wage fund theory. He only makes a payment at a stage or stages when there is a discernible manifestation of wealth through stages until completion. This payment received by the contractor is paid towards the provider of credit to liquidate the debt. At no time during the transaction is there the need to have a stock of wealth from which wages and all other expenses is taken. What the credit provided by the bank is a stock of wealth created by the laborers of society. When the laborer of the contractor produce the stages of wealth of the project, they produce value, which is exchanged for the value in the form of money, which can be used to purchase goods and services of comparable worth in the society. If this exchange cannot take place, then nothing can be produced in the community. For example, the building of bridges, giant reservoirs, and the like is not limited to any preconceived fund put up but only by the day-to-day production of industry throughout the society. Capital cannot limit production. Capital is there to assist labor in production and not to pay labor as the wage fund theory suggests. Labor only depends on land and access to land. It is man's skill and knowledge that produce capital, which aids in production. Now we come to the Malthusian Doctrine. The Malthusian Doctrine states that poverty is to be blamed on nature, which cannot provide for a constantly increasing world population. This is based on the simple calculation that populations double with the passing of every generation, and the earth could not provide resources to sustain this population growth. Can the Malthusian Doctrine explain the fact that although there is great incidence of poverty, there is an insurmountable unused stock of wealth in the form of food and other goods and services lying idle alongside this poverty in the world? The country is only overpopulated if by its production and trade it is unable to maintain its population. When crops are being plowed back into the land, or farmers are being paid not to produce, or production is restricted in many forms, quite obviously the pressure of population could not explain poverty. In these very countries, large fortunes fall into few hands. Monopolies and other barriers restrict production, and there are some examples of chaotic governments bringing poverty on their peoples. The Malthusian Doctrine suggests that it is really survival of the fittest. It is in the very nature of things for poverty to exist, and so it is every man for himself to secure his existence. What are the facts? In the animal kingdom, wild creatures are limited in number only by two forces: available food and falling prey to their natural enemies. When there is food in abundance and no natural enemies about, wild animals are known to man to multiply to the extent their numbers do become a nuisance eventually. Man is not similar. What the facts show that with an abundance of food and shelter, the rate of reproduction in man actually reduces when these circumstances prevail. Man has certainly found a way to create the conditions through science and technology to insulate himself against the threat of hunger. Man can produce any quantity of food he desires to feed the entire world population, and will continue to do so even when the world population increases. The problem is in the distribution of this food to the entire world population. As far as shelter is concerned, it is said that there is enough land mass to adequately shelter the entire world population many times over and still cater to the needs of environmental conservation, etc. Although the wage fund theory and the Malthusian Doctrine have been exploded by academics and writers, the essence of these views still linger. Another view is the belief that investment is necessary, and the amount of investment determines the limit of employment possible. The other belief is that poverty, war, and pestilence belong to the natural order of things. The prodigious powers of nature are newly discovered by man every year. It is inexhaustible in its ability to provide for man's benefit and use. When man uses nature, nature gives back in abundance. The productive power in man can certainly treat with any circumstance of want, but he must have access to nature. Production is therefore not the issue to the alleviation of poverty and want. It is access to nature and the distribution of wealth that holds the answers to this perennial dilemma. Next week, we shall be looking at the distribution of wealth. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all, eventually all over the world. To make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for this dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address nigelgittins@gmail.com. Thank you for your kind gesture.